Welcome to Cocktails and Socktails, the podcast where we make cyber relevant to everyone and unlock the stories of our leading industry professionals. We're Megan and Carly, and we're both security professionals employed by Microsoft. However, all opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and are not representative of the opinions or position of Microsoft Corporation. None of the opinions expressed on this show are authorized to be used as representation of our employer. Thank you for tuning in for this episode. Make sure to click the like button if you find value in this episode. If you're a like-minded security professional who wants to tune in and listen to us talk shop, then hit the subscribe button and the notification bell down below so you don't miss an episode. Now, let's get into the cocktails and socktails. Here we go. Welcome to the pod. Cheers.
Yeah. Welcome, Jen. I'm so happy to have you. I'm very excited because, you and I have worked together for so long, and now you can finally, come off of mute regarding some of the topics we'll talk about today. But before we get into that, can you tell us about yourself, please?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me on here. And I am glad that I'm able to talk openly about all of the really exciting things that are going on in the DIB cyber world in DoD. I am Jen Henderson, and right now my current position is I am the Senior Cyber Policy Analyst and also the DIB Cyber Liaison for DCMA, the Defense Contract Management Agency. I'm the liaison to OSD and DoD CIO. I also serve as the advisor to our executive director for the tech directorate with all things related to DIB cybersecurity.
That's incredible. I mean, so cyber policy, DIB cyber policy with the government. I'm going to tee it up, but how does an opera singer become a DIB cyber policymaker? Tell us about your background and how you got here.
Okay, so not quite a full-on opera singer. I am classically trained, and I started when I was 14 years old and would go every year to a summer camp at a liberal arts school that also had a boarding school. Every summer, they would try to talk me into coming to the boarding school to continue that voice training. And so finally, my mom agreed to it for my last year of high school, and I went to boarding school and was able to continue that voice training. So that I do have a little bit of an interesting background. And then after boarding school in college, I have a degree in international business and French. I taught French in the Dominican Republic for 2 years. I absolutely love that. I always say it was the best 2 years of my life. Actually, it was about a year. And then I went to language school for Spanish in the Dominican Republic too for a while. So I came back and I just did other different jobs and careers. I used to own a life insurance business, and I did that for a while until I became a mom. And that just was not very conducive to my lifestyle, having the babies and having to work for 70 hours a week in my own business. It was just crazy. So I was looking for something a little bit more realistic for having babies. I had 2 babies under the age of 2 at one point in time. So someone from church came to me and said, "Hey, we're looking at Defense Contract Management Agency for some interns, and you have to be working on a degree for this particular internship." And I happened to be working on my MBA at the time. So I applied and that was my foot in the door. Now, I really got going with writing contracts for the Department of Defense, and I wrote them for the Defense Contract Management Agency. One of my biggest customers was IT cybersecurity. So I would write lots of IT contracts for those guys and developed a really good relationship with them. So when the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment at the time, it was Miss Ellen Lord, Honorable Ellen Lord, she had the DIBCAC stood up, which is the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center out of the Defense Contract Management Agency. And I had the director of the DIBCAC come to me and say, "Hey, I have a whole lot of really smart cyber techies, but you know contracting, you know regulation, you know the law, the policies, so you can keep us all out of trouble, right? You wanna? So I said, let me think about it, because it's a lot to leave the contracting world and the power of the pen, as everyone likes to say. It's a really good career field. But after seeking a lot of counsel and advice from other friends, they said, go for it. This is going to be a good move for you to have that contracting background and now that cyber experience and expertise. So I did it, and I'm so glad that I did. I have never once thought about going back into that arena. I absolutely love my job and what I do.
The tip of the spear. Okay, now can you share, because I did not know this until you shared it with me, but can you tell Megan your first meeting, interaction, thought of me?
What?
With the blue light?
Okay, so when I was writing contracts, I had to come up and see one of the guys that was in IT cybersecurity where Carly was working. And I was looking for him for something to do with his contract that was being held up, and I needed it in order to award this contract. So I come looking, well, they're behind closed doors, like locked.
They're in a skiff.
They're in a
Megan,
skiff.
you know, like that life.
So I get someone to open the door, and of course they have to flip on the blue lights, like intruder alert. And so these blue lights are going and going and going, and everybody stops and looks at me. I feel like I'm like, where are my clothes? Like everyone's looking at me like, who is this? Who is this? And all eyes are like rotating in their chairs. Who's in this, suite, in this skiff? So all of a sudden, Carly comes marching around. She's wearing a cute little tight pencil skirt, looking all business. And she's like, can I help you? I was like, yeah, I'm looking for Will. She was like very intimidated, like, Carly, don't
listen, unescorted, blue light on. Who are you? Why are you in my space?
Like, who are you?
Carly
like,
is in
do
charge.
You need something? And
I don't. Why the blue light? I'm not from that world.
So if you're not cleared to work in that space, or you don't have a clearance and you're not on the list, then they turn the light on so people know not to do cleared work while that light is on.
Interesting.
So I
have worked in a skiff, but it was not that serious. So maybe I shouldn't divulge that we were doing things out of protocol. But it was. Maybe where I worked wasn't a skiff. It was open storage, just at secret level. So you could just roll. I mean, you had to be escorted, but there was no blue light that I'm aware of. I mean, I guess maybe there could have been.
And maybe everyone allowed in there was cleared, to be in there.
Yeah. Because we had nipper and sipper. So you could work side by side. And so if you had somebody in who was not on the list, you weren't supposed to be working on the high side while they were in there. And so the blue light is to let everybody in the know, because it's a bigger space. There are some places have these magnetic spinning lights that they put up so that people can see, because the cubicles you can't necessarily fully see. So when I visited my friend's husband's office, he went in and he shoved out of his office uncleared people in the room. But
interesting.
It was funny because I didn't remember that, but I definitely was a hall monitor when it came to that. Because people would forget to shut the blue light off too, and we're like, "Is somebody uncleared in here? Okay, let me go back to work." What are you doing here?
And from that moment forward, you were like, I want to work with this Brad. She seems like she's in charge.
The one that came to me and asked me to come work for the DivCAC absolutely loved Carly. She was his EA, executive assistant. Carly, is that what your official?
Yeah, essentially.
And he trusted her so much.
Guy that
I
we
trusted
all know?
him. So
yes, Megan actually knows him.
Very loosely. So he worked for the agency he was leaving the agency that I started working for. I guess he went from there to DCMA. We had a moment of overlap, but didn't really know him. But a lot of the guys, Josh that you worked with, I worked with Josh at ITA. So it's a small world. It is truly a small world when you think about it.
It really is. Cyber is a small world.
Yeah.
Very small. But
The
I
blue
mean, I
light
will say,
community.
yes.
The blue light. Oh, but see, that wasn't me.
But
I
you are
was the
now.
odd one out.
Well, now you're cleared. Now
Now
you're on the inside.
Now I'm on the team.
There you go. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's actually been really cool to see you go from like that contracting specialist to like what you're doing now. And so like I love that because I think you are so smart and it's definitely like Megan and I, it's a path less like least taken, but like you are very like influential in the community, Ellis wouldn't have like done what he did and placed you where you were if you weren't trusted. And so to get into like the nitty-gritty of it a little bit.
Yeah, let's get into the
So
sauce here.
the sauce,
Oh
the
boy.
secret sauce. Oh, well, okay, so like
Let's
you
do
and
it.
I started DibCAC, way back in the beginning. So you've been there in the beginning. You've seen the trends and similarities. We're going to kind of like go like before we start talking about the rulemaking, I want to talk about a couple other things, right? And we always talk about like these are what's trending, and this is like always like one of the things that DibCAC could talk about are like the most frequent findings type of things, similarities of requirements not met that have been persistent. And so has that trend, I mean, the last time I saw like the top 10 slide, it hadn't changed. Has it changed? Do you kind of know why? Do you think the rulemaking now will kind of shift that? It's kind of like
That's a good
3 or 4 questions in one, but really like, do you see like what's the common denominator of like those most not met requirements? And will that change now?
Sure, that is a good question. And I think that there are some that are the other than satisfied, which is the NIST SP800-171 term for basically fail. Like you did
Not
not meet
meeting.
it, not met.
Yeah.
So there are some of the greatest hits that are still the greatest hits, right? And they will continue to be, right? That's 3.13.11. That was one of your favorite ones, right? FIPS validated cryptography.
Yeah, well, but that's gonna kind of change now because the wording in the rulemaking has changed, validated, and allows kind of for certified. Like it kind of
Right.
allows that gray area that people were mostly missing to get them partial credit. Now it's not going to affect them.
That is, there are all sorts of nuances. And then of course, there's a class deviation in effect for the DFARS, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. The DFARS 252.204-7012, or the 7012 is what we most often refer to it. And that class deviation was issued in May, I believe, pretty much right before the revision 3 of the 800-171 came out. And that class deviation basically paused the requirements to revision 2, right? But there's so much going on, like what's happening with revision 3 with these different requirements too. We just really truly have no idea. But the FIPS compliance, the FIPS validated cryptography has been consistently the most missed requirement. And while it's been persistent from the beginning, it could be a result of different things. Many of the companies might not truly understand the requirement. They might not understand how to implement the requirement. They might use some other encryption mechanism that just isn't FIPS validated and think that that's, acceptable. Or, there's also delays in the FIPS process itself. That is consistently a trend as well. FIPS validated is probably number one. The other greatest hits is
MFA.
Multi-factor authentication 3.5.3, right? And so another one of those where it's a variety of reasons where companies don't understand the requirement or they have incomplete implementation. They haven't done it across all systems that are required to have it, among a host of other things. But you were asking, has the top 10 remained the same? And I will say no. And this is very interesting because as DCMA DIBCAC has actually started assessing smaller organizations, the data has been showing that there's no longer a consistent top 10. It's becoming a little bit more pervasive that there's a whole lot more that are being missed. There's not the top 10 necessarily, but just more spread out across the other than satisfied requirements. And it could be a result of limited resources, limited understanding, having the availability, the people, the SMEs available to actually do it. So the smaller organizations that we've been assessing, we've been seeing it spread out more across the requirements.
Now, there were a couple of things that you kind of mentioned in regards to like understanding the requirement, knowing how to implement it, the CMMC 2.0 is essentially NIST 800-171 Rev 2, for lack of better terms. And, the rule's been out now, final published for a week. And interpretation is key in this game, right? Intent and interpretation, like, is there going to be any way to kind of clarify, or as you see like different interpretations like across the board, how to kind of kibosh that? Because obviously like what DoD's interpretation is what matters. So where is there going to be anybody doing that, if you will?
So CMMC does go a long way with all the supporting documentation, the supporting guidance that also goes along with the program. It's not just the programmatics, the program requirements that are codified in the 32 CFR, right? They also come with a plethora of supporting documents that are assessment guides, scoping guides, hashing guides, the model guide, the implementation, everything, right? And so also the ecosystem has built into it those advisors of sorts to be able to help those organizations before they even get to assessments, right? And there are other organizations too, even government organizations that also have tools and available resources, Project Spectrum through the Office of Small Business Programs. Also DC3 and the DICE program, they have several tools also available, an NSA Cyber Collaboration Center that can help with the readiness of these companies as they prepare.
Okay. Well, that's good, because I think that's going to be the biggest kind of game going like over the next few months until
That's
the
right.
CFRs are published as well.
That's right. That's the most important thing. I think the biggest takeaway for these companies is to realize that, I mean, it's coming. And I think that's the biggest relief. The 32 CFR is out, that final rule. So sure, the effective date is set to be December 16th of this year, after the 60 days of the congressional review period. That means that the 32 CFR program is actually in effect. It's on the ground, but it's not in contracts yet because the 48 CFR, which puts those requirements into the DFARS, it has not been finalized. It just closed for public comment from the proposed rule recently. But I think the most important thing is, it's coming. It's here for real, for real. So get ready, be getting prepared now so that there are no acquisition holdups. Since CMMC is a pre-award requirement, that is a condition of award. You do not want to be left, hanging and not be considered for source selection because you don't have your ducks in a row. You don't have everything fully implemented within the parameters that CMMC outlines. And CMMC, it beautifully outlines the requirements in order to be considered for minimum conditional compliance, right? They lay out the actual POAM, or plan of action and milestone requirements for those other than satisfied or not met requirements. and a time-bound period in which you have to close those to be fully implemented, right? So there's no reason not to go ahead and take advantage of the gap between the 32 being out and the 48 being out.
Awesome. Now, with CMMC 2.0, so that's going to be part of the, what, 7021 or the FAR. So where does the NIST 800-171, 7012, like, there's going to at some point be some conflict? Or do you see that there will be conflict between the two?
What do you mean?
So, because 7012 points to NIST 800-171, and with Rev 3, it changes significantly. And then CMMC 2.0, which will be a certification required for the contract. So they're both going to be assessed continuously?
You mean the DoD assessments, like the basic, medium, high, at the same time as CMMC?
Well, I guess, like, because the 7012, is the 7012 going to not be part of contract clauses anymore?
Oh, it
Because
will.
the
So the
7021
7012 is the baseline authority. The 7012 lays the authority, the groundwork. It requires that contractors that process, store, or transmit covered defense
Right.
information, or CUI, controlled and classified information, that they have to provide adequate security for their
Right.
own contract information systems. And how they do that is through the NIST SP800-171, right?
Right.
And so that is the general baseline of saying, if you deal with CUI on your own networks, you have to be compliant with the 800-171. So then CMMC is just the assessment framework that goes in and checks that. But it's still both the DoD assessments, like what the DIBCAT currently does right now with those on-site, high on-site, or there's the medium assessments. That is the same basis of the NIST 800-171 as prescribed in the 7012 as CMMC level 2, right? So that's the same. And that's part of why they issued that class deviation to pause the 7012, because the 7012 was originally written to say, you know,
Right.
it's whatever the version is of the NIST 171
Right.
at the time of solicitation. And because it takes a while for companies to actually implement, especially how much is being changed in the revision 3 of the 171, takes a while to get there. But also the CMMC program was way down the path of rulemaking as well, too, on that 800-171 revision 2, and was required to identify the actual revision for the program. So it will take a period of time for everything to transition over to that. We couldn't literally just start assessing Rev 3 the day that it drops.
Right.
But that's why the class deviation exists. And I'm sure that the 7012 will actually have to be modified in the future. And a case be opened up in order to put in some of those other nuances.
Okay. So, right. And that's kind of where I was going, like, okay, so rules finalized, obviously the program's not like full in motion yet, but once the program full is in motion, what happens to the 7012? Because then they're two related clauses, but two different sets of requirements. So then what does that look like? So essentially, something's going to happen to the 7012 down the line, but for now, it's kind of working in parallel.
Yes, the 7012 is the basis. So I could see the 7012 case being opened up to add the NIST 800-172 in there. Because the only time the NIST 800-172 is introduced at all is through CMMC as level 3. So the 7012 is the base authority. And then the 7020 is the assessment authority for the DoD assessments. And the 7021 is the assessment authority for CMMC. But both of the 7020 and the 7021 go back to the 7012 as the underlying authority.
This is all very interesting. I'm like an outsider to this. I'm not going to ask you nearly as technical of questions as Carly has. But so I come from the world of, so not on the DIB side, actually in the government space where we did the 853 stack. And so what I think is so interesting around this is that with this CMMC process, the results, like your ability to know the top 10 findings across everyone who's been assessed, this is like unheard of in the government space because we don't share. Like, right? And before I joined Microsoft, I was an SI with the Marine Corps. And even amongst that small Marine Corps community and authorization of systems, we weren't sharing like, what are your top POAM items? Like, what controls are you struggling with? And so I feel like in the implementation process, this is so much further ahead because you have the ability to correlate findings across everyone who's being assessed. What a genius idea. Like, how much faster are we going to get to outcomes as a result of this information sharing? I like wish there was this level of transparency on the government side. I feel like there's got to be lessons learned with, I think you guys would all agree that this has not been like CMMC implementation has not probably been the smoothest process. I think it's been met with a lot of pushback and thoughts. And I was listening to the Summit 7
To say the least.
podcast earlier today where said something like, was it 8,000 comments or 18,000? It was
1,800 public
okay,
comments.
1,800 public comments. Like you'd never see that on the government space
on any
side, right?
other public policy.
Because
public
it impacts, because it impacts like the DIB is this massive space. And so even though it's been met with a little pushback, I feel like in terms of deploying, like if we look back on the DoD side, from the time we went from like DITSCAP to DIACAP and then DIACAP to RMF, we're like talking a decade in between, like changing policies even a little bit. And so in my eyes, you guys might feel differently, but in my eyes, this has been kind of a fast rollout. I've been with Microsoft for 3 years, and it's been about that a length of time that CMMC has been kind of taken very seriously as a requirement, and now obviously like the mandate. But so I feel like this is actually happening very fast. You guys might disagree with me, but I feel like there are also probably some lessons learned from this whole process that could be taken on the, NIST RMF 853 side of the house. So, kudos. I think the whole thing coming together is super cool. You guys were talking earlier too. The other thing I wanted to kind of throw out around, so now this is the way I understand it, is like basically now the 172 is part of the rule process, right? So that we can now be assessed at the level 3. So are there organizations that like knew they were level 3 that wouldn't have gone through up to this point, at least being assessed at level 1? I mean, would there have been any reason for anyone to kind of slow roll and think like that would not apply to me, even pursuing the level 1 certification?
I'm not, well, so level 1 is FCI, Federal Contract Information, right? And so that's a lot of people, right?
Like
Federal
everybody.
Contract Information. Right,
everybody in the gov getting FCI, like
at least. And it seems like everybody in the club is getting some form of CUI, it feels like. But yes, so I'm not totally sure, but everybody knows pretty much that they have FCI unless they're COTS, which is commercial off the shelf, right? Like I can order it off a website, I can order it out of a catalog, pick it up at Walmart, kind of thing. That's COTS. But then anything else is probably going to have some form of FCI in it, and then CUI. So as far as the 800-172 goes, they probably do know that they are going to require the enhanced safeguarding measures of the 800-172, but it's not like, oh, hey, you know what? We for sure know we're going to be level 3, because that hasn't come out yet. The guidance hasn't even fully rolled out to the acquisition workforce. That is coming out. But of course, that 48 CFR also is going to play a big role into that.
Well, and it's not even all of the controls of 172, right? It's a subset of those controls. And so
24.
So people are like, which ones do I need to, you know, be paying attention to? And so it is now known what those 24 are. And I think, I mean, most companies that would be considered level 3 probably know that they might fall into that realm. But they're like, it's definitely level 2. And then so they'll have to have that certification. And then Jen, to my understanding, then DIBCAC will assess those additional 24.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if you have a level 3 requirement on a contract that you're bidding for, right, then you will have to have a certified CMMC third-party assessment organization perform that assessment and be fully certified by them. That means final certification, final status of CMMC, 100% compliant with level 2, certificate in hand, basically, before you can even contact the DIBCAC for that level 3 assessment. As part of the level 3 assessment, the DIBCAC will be also doing spot checks. There could be a period of time between when a level 2 certificate and assessment and certificate have been issued, has been done, and there could be differences, right? And so they will do that spot check before they actually perform that level 3 assessment.
Crazy. This is so interesting.
I do want to make a comment though, about what you were saying, Megan, about how we were able to kind of collect all that data, or how DIBCAC, I say we because they're still in my heart.
You're still part of the club.
They're still in my heart.
You
But
have your certificate, right? Your what is it? Your plank.
my plank owner, I think it's hanging up somewhere. It's on
Look,
the other
she's
side.
She was an OG.
The original.
She is.
Yeah, part of the
OD,
original 10.
original DIBCACer.
OD, original DIBCACer. But I wonder if the government would potentially be able to collect that data. So I mean, because when a CCRI happens, they're putting their results into a system, and then it's just kind of like correlating those results to what you want. Like, you know, I'll shout out Bill Cosner, who created the database that the reporting is done in when DIBCAC does their assessments. And so from that, it made assessments easier for the people assessing and then creating those final reports. But B, you were able to then objectively, without identifying who, you know, and that's the biggest thing is we name these, like DIBCAC names these top 10, but they're not diming out different companies. And so he was able to, like, it's just an easy report of what are, like, you know, what findings of all the assessments that are in this database, which requirements are most not met. And so shout out to Bill Costner for making that. He actually got an award for that, didn't he?
He did, through NIST.
Yeah.
Like innovator.
Imagine how much simpler it could be if we could use like Power Automate or something like that. Anyway, this is a sales call.
So on the DoD side though, like they're for CCRI or now Cora assessments, I know that those results probably are aggregated. So Cora that's like a joint level, the DISA level assessment, and those the validation findings are probably shared with the select group. But like if you're a tactician, if you're like out in the field trying to figure out, okay, we failed this control, I wonder how many other organizations that leverage, I don't know, like let's say you're running on Red Hat and it's an Oracle based system. Like I'd really love to know how other systems are doing that and like the level of findings across the field. That data being available to the folks who need it, that's like to my knowledge, it's not happening. I think there's a lot of things that have progressed since then in terms of information sharing, like NDISAC, where you could like get that information pretty easily. But like back in the day when I was doing it, it was like if it was being shared, unbeknownst to us, we had to just figure it out, right? So, but I think it's so cool the level of awareness that like the commonality of vulnerability data and the, you know, other than MET control status being known by the issuing organization. I think that is like just so far in the right direction.
And we're always improving, right? the systems are improving, and the DIVCAC is still relatively new. It was stood up in 2019. So the systems are still in development, and then we're changing course. We'll focus mostly on CMMC, and all of those results are in the CMMC version of EMAS. So that will then be captured in reports generated, and I'm sure metrics gleaned for the CMMC Program Office to be able to pull those results. So we're learning.
It's very cool. Do you work in EMAS?
I do not, no.
You're not missing too much. No, it's great. If you love it's better than back in the day it was spreadsheets. We used to joke, this is like a terrible
Yes.
joke, but I'm gonna like tell it anyway, that like China should be shaken in their boots because we're smothering them with spreadsheets. We had so many. I had a spreadsheet for everything. I had vulnerability spreadsheets, I had poems, like kind of
That's
silly.
funny.
And especially like with where we are now with the technology and like, EMAS among other GRC tools, like continuous monitoring effort, that seems kind of silly to be doing that stuff in spreadsheets, but that's like the spreadsheet won't fail on you, right? Like the other tools, trouble logging in, and spreadsheets tried and true at least.
Yes, 1,000%. Jen, what kind of hurdles do you see in this next segment of program implementation? Can you talk to any hurdles? This can be like your own personal opinion, but obviously I know you can't have a personal opinion since you are.
Are you talking about specifically for CMMC or what DIVCAC is?
I mean, I guess all of the above, right? So you straddle kind of both worlds, right? Being at the program office. That's going to be another question that I have, but what kind of hurdles are you guys maybe preparing for with now that the rule's been finalized and now we're just waiting on the CFRs, things going forward and the actual implementation of the program, since it's all
Right.
kind of been pilot type deal. What are you guys anticipating potentially, if you can share that?
So I shared a little bit with you last night when I saw you about implementation. I've had so many people ask me if I feel so relieved that the 32 final has come out, that it's dropped. And the answer is yes and no. Yes, in the fact that I have worked 3 years alongside with the CMMC PMO and trying to get this thing off the ground and get it as right as it can be, right? I helped to adjudicate those 1,800 comments, although I specifically was just asked to work on the ones that dealt with the DIVCAC related specific areas of the rule. But yes, I do feel relieved that it is here, that it's a legit thing. But I am also I also realize that the bulk of the work actually is in front of us, because now we have to make this thing work. We have to implement, and we have to make sure that it's a success or set it up for success. So there's still so much that truly needs to get done to see this thing come to life that, that is a little bit daunting. So what I see that we really need to make sure that we do is to make sure that what I want the DIB to realize is that it's coming, like what I said before. Go ahead and take advantage of the time now. You have all of the information out there. We're not saying, oh, we can't talk about it, we're in rulemaking now. If you go and take a look at the CMMC website on DoD CIO's website, it's updated as of Tuesday when the rule dropped. It's beautiful. It has slideshows. It has all the documentation and links to everything. The tools are there. Go ahead and start working your way that way. Now for DIVCAC, what this means is we really have to start working towards implementing the level 3 assessments, right? We've never done those before. So we've been focusing mostly on the 800-171 assessments, joint surveillance assessments, and the candidate CMMC third-party assessment organizations assessments of their environments. So we have to actually ramp up and be able to turn on a dime as soon as we absolutely need to. And that's going to take training of the assessors for the 800-172, the level 3. That will take actually going through the motions, right? And we also have to meet with DoD CIO, CMMC Program Office on a regular basis to understand what their priorities are as well. So I see a lot of things coming. There's a lot of unknowns too, because it's never been done before.
It's kind of exciting to see, like,
It is.
even when we started it, like in 2019, like, I mean, I remember when we literally pilot assessment after pilot assessment, adjusting our process
That's
and
right.
adjusting our assessment flow to make it go faster, to make it more efficient for both us and for the contractor.
Right.
But it's still constantly changing, which I'm sure is exhausting for everybody involved, industry and government. And while we have made this mark, there's so much more to go. But I think what's really cool, especially coming away from DIBCAC and into industry and still being a part of that community, is seeing how passionate these advisors that you talk about. I sit on a call with them weekly, most weeks, and they believe in the program, they believe in the need for it, and are trying to figure out a way to help bridge that gap for the government, but also prepare industry for these assessments. And I think it's really cool to see, and I've been able to see kind of both sides of it. So I love it. I mean, I love where it's going. It's needed, right? And then kind of talks to, so you do strategy and you're the liaison between the PMO's office and DIBCAC, and how are there challenges being kind of in both sides of it, that both the tactical and the strategic? What's the hardest part of doing that?
Sure. Wow, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that one. Yes, actually, it really is. So 3 years ago, I was asked by my one of our bosses at the time, John Ellis, if I would be interested in serving on the CMMC rulemaking team to help, basically on loan almost, to DoD CIO CMMC Program Management Office. And it was part to help them because they didn't have all of their civilian staff in place at the time, and they were building up their own office as well with support contractors too. So they also needed a voice from DCMA, right? A DIBCAC voice. I was in business operations, and not pulling away, taking me was not pulling away an assessor from an assessment team. However, having that business operations experience, I had that pretty much that cradle to grave understanding of the assessment process, how we prioritize the contractors in order to inform our assessment schedule, and how we go from that pre-assessment process, all the intake, the logistics, to actually executing the assessment week of, and then post-assessment, and what happens after the fact with the final reports and the scores that get put into SPURS and all that. So I was able to bring all of that information and help to inform the rule. And I actually wrote the parts of the rule related to that, like the methodology, scoring methodology, the parts for the level 3 related to DIBCAC, and the standard acceptance, which allows for the DIBCAC assessments to count towards CMMC level 2 certification if they are perfect scores prior to the effective date of the rule. So I think that it was beneficial for me to do that, but it's also a little bit hard as the liaison too, in order to remember, what did I pass down? Did I pass down the right information both ways, and to the right stakeholders, right? So there's lots that could fall through the cracks. So there is a lot of pressure to make sure that you are conveying to your leadership. And like I said, my leadership is Dr. Christensen. executive director of the tech directorate, and the DIBCAC sits under her in the tech directorate. And keep her abreast, keep Nick Del Rosso, who's the DIBCAC director, abreast of any of the things that I have heard from those strategic level engagements or the CMMC rulemaking engagements, or I'm on a DFARS technical team as well for the DFARS rules related to anything DIB cyber, not just CMMC. And then also taking any of those things that DCMA has and pushing it back up and getting it up to OSD as well. So it's straddling the fence, but I spend a lot of time up north and a lot of time at DCMA.
Truly split house. Well, that's great. I think that's like definitely what's needed, because there's always a disconnect between who's kind of on the ground versus who's making the policy. And you have the, tactical experience being on the team prior to going to this liaison position. So I think that's really good. The last I got two questions actually. One, this is personal mostly.
Uh-oh.
FedRAMP equivalency.
Ooh. Oh, that's
when can we hope to see a change to that memo?
What change?
I heard that the memo is supposed to be updated. Everybody's heard that the memo is supposed to be updated. I understand that equivalency is probably not going away, but okay.
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, who knows? So there's a little bit of history there. And of course, you would ask me about this one, because this one's the one that everybody has heartburn over.
This is what takes away from my day job, okay?
Can you put your head on the pillow at night until the memo comes out? Okay, so this has been an ongoing saga for a while now, and the DFAR 7012 clause under adequate security says if you use a cloud service provider that those CUI, anything CUI, if it's in the cloud, that cloud service provider has to either be FedRAMP moderate or equivalent to that FedRAMP moderate baseline, but no equivalency was ever defined at the time that this was entered in the 7012. Now, I have been told, or I've heard, I wasn't around when they wrote the 7012, that they did that they wrote equivalency in there at the time because there were a few that were actually FedRAMP cloud service providers, actually are FedRAMP authorized, right? So they needed to say equivalent to kind of spread the wealth and allow there to be more options. But now there are hundreds and hundreds on the marketplace, I've been told. So that's not as much of an issue, but FedRAMP equivalency still had never been defined. I believe it was last year when the memo was written, and it basically said that you had to be equivalent because there was no one in the government that was going to act as the, I guess, the authorizing official, or the one taking, blessing off on it and taking the risk on behalf of the government, that you had to be 100% equivalent with the baseline and present that body of evidence. So DoD CIO, DoD heard loud and clear that that was no bueno, right? So Mr. McEwen of DoD CIO announced at a DIB Cybersecurity Summit that there would be modifications, a revision to it. And those revisions, what I do know from, and I did vet this with the CIO's office before coming on here, just to make sure I could discuss, that it is a revision memo, is in coordination and is in the works. And that's about all that I can say. I don't really know a whole lot of the details anyway, but it is under revision. And we obviously know it's going to get better, because it can't get more restrictive than 100%.
It can't get worse.
So there you go. That's all I can say.
It can't get worse. Okay, last question. So Canada has announced it's doing its own version of CMMC. I know that I'm sure other countries are also looking at us, looking to y'all. What are you doing? how can they implement something similar? Do you see this program potentially turning into like an international standard, or is it still going to, because of like data sovereignty and data residency, might just still be country by country? Like, what does this International Tour Day CMMC look like?
That is an interesting thought. I would love to see an international scene. That would make all of our lives so much easier if it were an international standard.
I mean, there are some
I
that would
would love
argue
that.
there is one, but that's a different conversation for a different day. I didn't vet those questions.
I would love
I
to
didn't send you those
see,
questions ahead.
you know, the 800, 171, and 172 internet standards. But that's a different conversation for a different day. So that is an interesting question. And, you know, we could ask this a lot. And really, the standard is the standard. What is required for the protection of CUI in the 7012 is the 800-171, and then now the 800-172 in addition for the enhanced safeguards. So the standards are not going to change. Now, maybe in the future, I would love to see it become an international standard. It would be so much more easy to spread the wealth and to get buy-in across our partners, right?
Well,
But
and our
there are
contractors are global for the most part as well.
absolutely, and we see this and hear this all the time. But CMMC, I do love this. CMMC does allow, there are ways built into CMMC to allow foreign companies to become C3PAOs within the CMMC program. So if there are some countries that have sovereignty concerns with US companies like US C3PAOs, or the US government like the DIBCAC coming in and assessing their companies, you know, maybe they also do work for that particular country and there's concerns that they would see some of their data as well. There are mechanisms built into CMMC to allow for that, and also just to allow for collaboration between our own countries to account for this, right? There's various international agreements and all these things in place. So they're working through a lot of these, and we have been meeting with a lot of foreign partners along this line as well.
Well, thank you. I mean, we've been at this for a while. Megan, do you have any other questions?
I was just going to ask you if you're taking some time off for the holidays. Like, I can imagine your weeks leading up to the rule drop were probably like upwards of 50, 60 hours a week. So, like, do you feel like you can take a breath? Do you feel like, okay, now I can relax. Now I'm going to like take some time away from work for the holidays? Or do you feel like tomorrow's just like another problem? You're going to have to get grinding again at something else?
So in the weeks before the drop is when we are able to breathe, because it's locked, like it's a done deal kind of thing. After the changes are made, when it goes to those final reviews or whatnot, all the comments have been adjudicated, then it's like you can breathe. There's several people that deal with CMMC that are actually on leave this week because they can breathe. But now I feel like, okay, now we have to implement this thing. So let's go. We've got a limited amount of time. So push. But I have been traveling a lot internationally for work, so I really haven't had a lot of time to breathe. You're right through this summer, but I think I will take time off during the holidays. And part of that is because as Govies, we have use or lose. So if I don't use it, I'm going to lose it. So I do typically, and the government a lot of times will shut down during December for parts of, the last 3 weeks of December. So I will take some time off. I don't know what I'm going to do, but my husband is a high school football coach, and I have 2 little boys that also love football. So my life is entirely absorbed with football if it's not absorbed with CMMC and DIB Cyber initiatives. So we will probably do something football related. Yay. And I get to go and sit in some cold football stands.
I was going to say, I can't tell if there's sarcasm there or not.
Totally.
While
I
she
love
may
it.
not enjoy it, she's always accessorized to the max with the football beaded earrings. She is the quintessential coach's wife.
Carly, you can come with me tonight. It's homecoming. Let's go.
Oh, is that the homecoming
Is it
game or is it
homecoming?
like
Yes.
dance? Oh, well, I mean, it's just up the road.
I know. It's right up by you.
Dang. Oh, Jen, are you in
Maybe.
Richmond?
Well, I'm a little bit farther south,
Got it. Okay.
but
I couldn't
yes,
remember
I
where you
am
were
in that
from.
area.
Look at Carly. You could go
Yes.
and practice your
Cheer.
homecoming queen,
That was
CMMC
never.
queen, two CMMC queens.
Yes. Um, all right. Final question.
Uh-oh. One more, really, this is going to be a good one. I feel it.
Can you tell us about the painting behind your head and your obsession?
This is my favorite question. I just thought you would never ask. Yes. So this is my home office. As I mentioned, I'm the only girl in my house. And so the rest of the house has lots of boy stuff, right? So this is my home office and it is Dolly Parton themed. Dolly is my girl. I love her and I have all things Dolly, and I've loved her ever since I was about 5 years old when my mom gave me my very first cassette tape of Dolly Parton. So I have collected vinyls, which I have vinyls on the wall beside me that you cannot see right now. Dolly Parton collection and a neon light. I have a Dolly Parton Christmas tree over here to my left that I keep up year round with feather boas and Dolly Parton ornaments. The whole room is Dolly themed, and I've been collecting memorabilia for ever since I was 5 years old.
Your collection is pretty incredible.
It
Love
is
it.
pretty intense.
But I love
Dolly
it.
is like trending too. It's like popular right now. Like even there's like mainstream artists, and I know nothing about music or whatever, but there's like mainstream artists like collaborating with her, and it's a thing right now.
Yes,
Did I tell
it
you? Did I
is.
send you? Or I'm sure you've seen it, Jen. The Pitbull and Dolly Parton 9 to 5 song.
Yes, I have.
I'll send it to you,
Incredible.
Megan. It's pretty
I
good.
haven't seen it. I'm
Um,
like not a music. I'm embarrassed to say music does not do it for me like it does some people, but like if it like I love that you love Dolly. Like I wish I like had that kind of like
Some people like
somebody.
themes, right? And
Yeah.
some people like music. I mean, it's more who she is and what she represents that I love. She
mm.
is sunshine and light and loves everybody and has such a good big heart that I want to be Dolly in my world.
Well,
So
and she also is pretty philanthropic too, right? Wrong
that's
thing.
right. She donated a bunch of money recently for the hurricane
North
survivors.
Carolina, yeah, because she grew up in the hollers.
That's right, in Tennessee. But yes, she did. She did donate. She's always doing things like that. So wonderful example.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I love it. Well, Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome.
Um,
Finally, I'm sorry it's taken forever.
Well, and the funny thing is we were gonna have this episode like a year ago, and then
I was
life.
looking through the notes, and it's been almost exactly a year since we started talking about interviewing
And
Jen.
I mean, so it's almost like perfect that it didn't happen because now you can talk more freely and openly
Yes.
and honestly. No tap dancing around answers.
Except
But
FedRAMP equivalency.
except for federal equivalency, which I
Your
fully
favorite.
expected. Which I fully expected. But I had to. The heartache that it has been, I had to. But
Love it.
thank you so much for joining us. We'll put some
Absolutely.
details in the bottom, in the show notes. And Megan and I are back with
We're back. We had a small
we had
sabbatical.
a little sabbatical, but what a way to come back. So you can always find us here on YouTube and just make sure to subscribe and like this video and hit the bell for notifications so you
Yep.
know when we come back, because it
Yep.
could happen again. Thanks, Jen.
All right,
Bye.
thanks.
Thank you for having
We'll
me.
see you on the next one. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.
Ooh,